Sometimes when
Alright, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Welcome to the Jackson Area Web and App Developers Meetup. I'm JC. If I have not met you before, if this is your first time, please introduce yourself afterward. I'd love to meet you. So we have a couple talks tonight. One is by myself, and I'm about to get started. And we are sponsored by SmartsWeb, who is a longtime sponsor. This is their space actually. So they have helped pick up the food and drinks, and they've also given us a space. So they've been longtime supporters of the meetup. They do software development, web and mobile, and also like digital marketing and all kinds of stuff. Blake, you want anything else that you'd like to add to that? Go definitely hit them up if you have like any kind of web and mobile needs. It's always great to do business with someone right here in town. Also, a couple of announcements. If you came to Magnolia.js last month, I greatly appreciate you coming. That was it was incredible considering it was planned in 6 weeks. We had 130 people show up from all over. People had a really good time, and we already have secured some speakers and sponsors for next year. And so next year is on track to be like way bigger than this year already. Also, another announcement, next month we will be meeting at C-Spire, the HQ at the Renaissance. So I already put that on meetup.com, but if you, just in case, just keep that in mind so you don't accidentally drive here, because I know we've been coming here for about 6 months. So we'll be at C-Spire, I think on the 6th floor, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they have a pretty cool space up there. Kind of overlooks the Renaissance, so it'll be a pretty cool experience. And yeah, I think that's basically the announcements. So I'm going to get started here. And if you looked at the meetup notes tonight, or ahead of 3 p.m., you probably saw that I was going to give a talk on fitness. And that is not the case anymore. Because I woke up and said, I want to give a talk on fault tolerance. And so I wrote the talk today.
That's where the best talks come from.
I literally took the day off and wrote a talk. So this is what I really wanted to talk about. And if you want me to talk about fitness, I will talk about it some other time. But yeah, so like I said, I'm JC. I'm a software engineer and growth manager at EchoBind. I've been there for actually just a couple of weeks. So it's still kind of new, but it's been awesome so far. We do web and mobile consulting mostly for healthcare, life science, and technology companies, kind of medium to large size. So if that's you and you need some outside opinions, like some consulting or some architecture decision help, or even just an expert level team to get you across the finish line, hit me up. I'd love to take you to lunch and learn more about your company. And also, I greatly appreciate them allowing me to spend time on this. Like, they sponsor my time to create talks like this and come here and run the meetup. So they care about my investment in the local community. So props to them. So today I'm going to talk about fault tolerance in React. Fault tolerance probably sounds really pretentious, because it is. I like to use words that make me sound smarter than I am. But it basically is just a way to describe gracefully handling problems or gracefully improving the user experience when things are going awry in your system. This is, let's see, here's an actual definition straight from Wikipedia. So fault tolerance is the property that enables a system to continue operating properly in the event of the failure of one or more of its components. So the idea here is picture a car, for instance. If I'm going down the road and my radio all of a sudden decides to go out or die or whatever, my car shouldn't die too, right? That would be weird and dangerous. So that would be poor fault tolerance. This is more of a topic historically probably in the DevOps community, because in the DevOps community you have hundreds of different things that could all be a single point of failure, and if any one of those things fails without proper fault tolerance, then your entire infrastructure might go down. So this is definitely more of probably a hotter, or historically a hotter topic in the DevOps community. But who here writes front-end code, of any form? Okay, so this is definitely an issue at the front end as well. It's not just something that should be thought of by DevOps engineers, backend engineers. If you write front-end code, you write code for really one of the most hostile, if not the most hostile environments in the world, like to write code for. You're literally writing code that is being executed in an environment you have no control over. And that environment also will be slightly different in every case, because even the time of the day or the date, it's always going to have some kind of variation from user to user. We deal with all types of chaos in this environment. We have different types of browsers that all implement specs slightly differently, although it has gotten better in the recent years. We deal with network latency issues. We deal with users being in out in the middle of nowhere with a bad connection, or even being offline. We deal with them being in landscape mode, portrait mode. We deal with them having assistive touch capabilities turned on or off. We deal with them being on different types of devices like screen readers. We deal with them having some kind of language settings on their machine that converts language to a different language that's better for them to understand. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong because you're ultimately making code that has to safely execute in another environment that has been customized to another person. So this is not an environment we control. It's just an environment that we kind of roll the dice on and try to hope for the best. And obviously we have some best practices, but anyway. All right, so fault tolerance in React specifically, what might this look like? I've got an example here. You're gonna see me, I don't know if you can actually see this. Yeah, so I'm gonna uncomment that bomb, it's gonna go kaboom, and now we got an error. And the error displayed on the screen for a second, but that's only because the environment is in development mode. In a production environment, it's just a white screen, the user sees a white screen. And this is a super contrived example. You shouldn't focus on the fact that it's just a couple of pieces of text up there. Think about it more of, where is this error occurring? It's occurring in this div that is separate from the H1, and yet the entire application is being brought down because of an error that occurred in that one div. So think of it as, if that was if we're on a blog page right here, think of that div as a Twitter feed. Think of the H1 as an article. If it's a Twitter feed, something happens with the Twitter feed, should I be unable to read the article that I just tried to visit? No, that'd be a terrible user experience. So this is obviously contrived, but hopefully this communicates the idea that we should handle errors in our UI because it has a direct impact on the user's experience. And thankfully, there's a way to do that in React called error boundaries. Who has heard of error boundaries? Okay, so one person, so almost everyone is going to learn something tonight. Have you written an error boundary? But you've heard of it. Okay, well you're going to learn some stuff too. Awesome. So this actually kind of shocked me this morning. I put out this poll on Twitter, and over 40% of people just were like, what's an error boundary? And I think this is telling of where the mindset is when we're developing our front ends. I think that it's kind of telling of where our, the fact that our mind is not on UX, where it should be as front end engineers. Yes, we write code, but ultimately our ultimate end of writing code is to give people a good experience in the applications we're building. It's not to, well, I mean, I'm sure it's to enjoy it and all that stuff too, but it's also ultimately, if we don't provide good user experiences, what are we doing? What are we doing in our lives? And between the what's an error boundary and the no's, you have nearly right at 70% of people that aren't using error boundaries in their apps. And I would go further and say they might not be doing much error handling at all, outside of maybe some try catches for network failures or something like that. But who knows what they're doing with their UI, even with that. Yeah, I think we should cover what an error boundary is first, and then kind of work our way back into fault tolerance. So error boundaries were introduced in React 16 back in September 2017. And they implemented a lifecycle method called component did catch. And this is actually still, all you fancy hook people, is still a method that can only be accessed inside a class component. You cannot do this with hooks. So if you have been writing React hooks, you're still going to have to write a class component if you want to implement error boundaries. But basically, the way errors work in React, or maybe in other places too, but in React specifically, and if a component triggers an error, the error effectively, for practical purposes, kind of bubbles up to its parent, that component's parent, and then that component's parent, all the way up the tree. And if no parent along that chain can handle that error, it eventually reaches the top level of the app, and the whole app crashes, and that's why you get the white screen. And an error boundary is literally a parent that is made to catch that error as it's bubbling up, and then do something with it so you can handle the effect it has on your UI and not bring down your entire application. So let's look at one. All right. So this is, and if you're unfamiliar with React, hopefully this will still kind of make some sense tonight. But in general, like, this is how you can kind of implement this however you want. The only requirement is that you have component did catch. Like, that's what classifies an error boundary. Errors bubble up as soon as it hits component did catch, and you handle the error, you're done. So I called mine bomb squad because we have a bomb, so let's call in the bomb squad to handle it. But generally you're going to see it called an error boundary. So we set some state initially. We just put a couple of fields to null. There is no error yet. And then component did catch is going to catch that error as one of its children or grandchildren or whatever somewhere down the tree sends an error up. And it's going to catch, and then we're going to set the state to actually contain the error, so it will no longer be null. And then in the render, this is pretty much like standard for an error boundary. You're going to, we have a turn area here on line 18, and if there's an error, we're going to render a fallback, which is a component. Like, generally, people implement this differently, but generally you're going to set the prop into this component called fallback or whatever, and that's going to be the component you render if there's an error. Otherwise, we render the children, which is just standard React for saying all the child components that were inside of this component, render them. So, like, if there is no error, we just render as normal. And let's see. All right, so now I'm going to import the bomb squad, and we're going to wrap this bomb with the bomb squad. Then you're going to see that we're going to get a fallback that says an error occurred, but the H1 is still intact. It's like the application is still running. There is no white screen for the user. They can still see all the other parts that weren't relevant to that error. It's just that part of the tree that just crashed. And then, again, this is a dumb example. We're going to see some better examples later, but hopefully this communicates the point of, like, one part of your UI can fail, you can handle it and however you want. This is still a stupid way to handle it. Like, an error occurred, cool. I mean, it's better than the whole app coming down. It's still not a great UX, but it is better than the whole app coming down. But you can see, like, the rest of the application can still run. All right, so let's just wrap the entire app in an error boundary and call it a day, right? That'll prevent the white screen. Yes, it will, sort of. Let's look at what happens. So I moved the bomb squad up to be the top error component, and now it just says an error occurred. Cool. Like, is that much better than a white screen? Like, this is actually, at best, I would, the 31% of people who said they have an error boundary in production, I would bet money that at least half of them just have one at the top level of their app. Like, literally, probably just at the top level. I know that one app at a company in the room that I used to be at has one at the top level of the app because that's the only one I wrote there. Anyway, so this is like cool. The app is like, it's not a white screen, but it's really still a broken user experience. At best, they're like, okay, I guess I'll try that later. But they're probably gonna land at that like anyway if they hit a white screen, unless it's like an app they're not tied to. Then you just lost a cell. Like, you just do that. and you probably lost a cell from this too. All right, so yeah, you still bring the whole app down. It's just not a blank white screen. So let's wrap every component in an error boundary, right? Who thinks this is a good idea? All right, so this seems like a good idea. And I need to say, a lot of this talk is inspired by an article by Brandon Dale. His website is awiri, I honestly don't know how he pronounces it, but awiri.dev, I think. And it's a fantastic article. It's the only article on the site, so if you go to that site, you'll see this article. And if you're going there from the future, my GoPro listeners, it's the first one he ever posted, so just go all the way back in time. But yeah, so a lot of this talk is inspired by that. So I'm not going to pretend that I came up with all this on my own. But anyway, so this kind of seems like a good idea. Like, we'll just catch every single component. We will handle their errors. Well, let's zoom in on line 11. So what if there is an error in this input component that accepts a credit card number, right? How does that, how might an input, like an error in that input component, affect the siblings, like the description or the checkout button? Like, what if maybe an error occurs that is kind of, it's not like an error with like validating that it's the right card number or anything, but just like some sort of input error. Some sort of state gets off for some reason because you weren't using Redux. Like whatever it might be. And your checkout button doesn't know about it, so it's still like will submit just fine. And then the user gets a weird error, if they get an error at all, because the cart description is also going to be unaware of this error, because the error is going to get caught at the error boundary on line 10. So like cart description and checkout button will know nothing about this error that just occurred. And so if cart description might also be maybe the container for your error messages, it doesn't know about the error, so it can't tell the user. Then you hit submit, and it can't tell the user about the error. So this might not be such a good idea, right? Half broken UI is full broken UX. Like, if that one piece is broken, it's making the UI kind of half broken. It's still usable, it's not all brought down, but it's still an entirely broken user experience, and it's still going to like result in, at best, a bug report. You hope, and at worst, like you just lost a cell. Also, so wrapping every component is not such a good idea. It can get even worse. You have really bad performance issues if you wrap every single component. Don't be discouraged by that. Like if you have to you have to have a lot of components and wrap every single one of them for this to be a problem. So don't let that discourage you. Like you should have multiple error boundaries in your app. But yeah, you can also have really bad UX because the more error boundaries you introduce into your component tree, the more tempted you're going to be to want to write some generic fallback to just say, okay, well, all my error boundaries will just have like this fallback, that's just like a frowny face that says an error occurred, which kind of like sounds okay, sort of, but it's lazy. And it doesn't have the user experience in mind. If I am submitting a blog post and I've typed out my post and then an error occurs in the component of the submit button, but you click it and the submit button turns into a frowny face, or worse, like the whole composer window turns into a frowny face. Like you could have a really bad user experience on your hands. And let's see. Instead of thinking about instead of trying to wrap the whole component tree in one error boundary, or trying to wrap each individual one, both of them can result. One of them is definitely overtly lazy and bad for user experience, and the other one, you're going to be really tempted to be lazy, because if you've got 1,000 components in your tree, like, are you really going to want to write a unique contextual like fallback that makes sense for the user experience for each one of those? Like, probably not, right? So we want to find the right balance of like what's the right amount of fallbacks or error boundaries to have. The way to do this is to think about fault tolerance in terms of features. So now we're back to like fault tolerance, which the way you do that in React is error boundaries. All right, so let's think about it in terms of features. Let's look at this screenshot of Spotify. So right off the bat, if you start looking at this UI and breaking it up in your mind in terms of features, like it's not like this whole thing is a feature. Like if we think critically about it, we've got at least 5 features up here. I mean, probably more. Like here's a few. And this, again, this is just like my take at it, my like 3-minute stab at it when I was putting this talk together today. This is not meant to be like exhaustive. This is meant to just get you in the right headspace. So like the way I thought about it was we got this like cover up here. It's got some meta information about the artist. We have like a search, and arguably even like those arrows, the nav, could be a separate feature because they really do kind of control some different state than the search. We've got like a feature up here to access like my user settings and stuff like that. We have like a see what your friends are playing feature. We've got we've got a bunch of stuff down here. I didn't even highlight anything. We have like, in my opinion, 3 over on that sidebar. We've got like some nav. We've got your library. Then we got some playlists. And each of these could also be pulling in like data from a different microservice. So like you have more potential for failure for each of those pieces. Because like what if there's a CMS that Spotify uses to like handle their nav, and then something, that's where they pull that list to show you. It's not just like static nav that they add to the app. Well, all of a sudden, and that error occurs or that service goes down. So anyway, and then most importantly, you got the player down here. Like that's a pretty important feature, right? The way to really like go about this is a recursive line of questioning. Brandon in his post said to think about it like this: to go through your component tree, start at the top, go through the tree, and at every level, ask yourself, if this component was to crash, should its siblings also crash? And sometimes it's going to be yes, sometimes it's going to be no. All right, so let's look at his example. So he's looking at Twitter. So when we look at Twitter, just for example purposes, we kind of have 3 main features here, right? We have like a home, we have who to follow, we have trends for you. So these can kind of be thought of as separate features because like they really don't relate to each other. Like if we look at it a little more closely, we can zoom in on, let's zoom in on like who to follow. So if who to follow, if something goes wrong in that component, let's ask ourselves a question like, if that component crashes, should its siblings crash with it? Like should a problem in this component bring down your newsfeed or your trends feed? No, like that would be stupid, right? All right, so that's a great place for an error boundary. If you answer that question with no, like the sibling should not crash if this component crashes, then that component should be in an error boundary. So zooming in further on it, well now we have like a who to follow heading. We've got a list of people to follow, and then we've got a link to show more suggestions. So if who to follow crashes, should its siblings crash with it? I would say no. Like you could probably still get some value if the list of followers with a follow button is still working. Like your suggestions come in, it's just like the title's missing. So the show more, like it's I don't think it should cause, like this is kind of the main focus. So I don't think that either of these two should really bring that component down, right? But the inverse, if that component goes down, should it bring its siblings down? I would say no. Like it may be a toss-up, but I would actually say no, because you can still click this link to go to a page that might be working. So why crash that link? And also, who to follow still gives some context of what was there. So if you render a fallback UI for this list, you can still give some context of just like something's wrong with this piece right now, but you can still click to go to another page where maybe that page is working. Again, this is all like subjective, and just everyone's going to land slightly differently. Zooming in even further, we've got the list item itself. So if the follow button crashes, should the sibling crash with it? Again, it's kind of subjective. I would say no, because if the sibling, if the link to the person is actually still working, then like you can still click on it, you can still go to that profile, click the follow button there. There's still some value there. But the inverse is not true. Like if something happens with, if you get an error in the component that renders the person, you probably should hide the follow button because it's like, well, who am I following? It's like, you can't see that, like if something's wrong with the data, you don't get that username or anything. It's like, I don't know who I'm following. So that's a great place for an error boundary. Cool. So in summary, fault tolerance is important. You should avoid having a single error boundary at the top of your app because that's just lazy and it's not good for UX. It's like, I did say in rare cases it's okay because in rare cases maybe your whole application should come down if one part of it is messed up. This is rare, and if you're having to ask yourself if this is the case for you, it's probably not. Like you'll just know all these pieces of the system need to be working or none of it needs to be working. I could see maybe some applications for like financial apps and stuff, maybe even healthcare apps. Like it's going to depend on your situation. But in general, for your everyday, hot startup, CRUD app or whatever, like, no, don't just wrap the entire app with an error boundary. Like that's just lazy. And don't overuse the error boundaries, all right? Because this is bad for performance. It's still bad for UX. You're going to be tempted to put in some generic fallbacks that don't make sense contextually in the component that's failing. To really do this well, you need to just put the work in and think about, in terms of UX, like think about each piece of your component tree and do that with recursive line of questioning. Find the feature boundaries. So let's see. I have one more thing, which is like my Steve Jobs-esque moment. You need to do like, you want to test these things too, right? So it's like, okay, I thought about my UI, I think I have at least, like I need to test that the way I thought through, which component should crash and which one shouldn't, that makes sense, like that it makes good UX sense, right? So you can go into every component and you can just throw an error in every component and start testing it that way. That's tedious and you risk shipping those errors to production, which could be catastrophic. I mean, it'd be fault tolerant, but no one would ever see the actual feature, right? You could write like a linter plugin or something to kind of find them on a pre-commit or something. Like, I don't know, who has time for that, right? No, like you want to use something that's built out of the box, won't run in production, and that is React Chaos, which I've been working on the past couple weeks. And I'm excited about it because it's my first open source project. It's not like that big of a deal, but it's still exciting. It's like my first time to open source something. And what it is it's chaos engineering for your React app. When I say chaos engineering, that's a whole separate topic, really, a whole separate talk. But the gist of it is we're intentionally introducing entropy into our system in order to make it more fault tolerant and test that it is fault tolerant, right? So we want to throw errors in our components randomly and test that we have really thought through the UX when random errors occur, right? So the way this works is you can wrap any component with chaos. You can pass in a level, 1 through 10. The closer you are to 10, the more likely chaos is going to occur. And then you can also pass in a custom error message for like a component that does trigger the chaos. You can pass in a message to display. It will not run in production unless you explicitly tell it to. Like you have to be very explicit in telling it to, run in production. If you're crazy like Netflix and you have like lots of engineers and lots of money, then run it in production. Like that's cool. For the rest of us that can't afford to just attack our production environments all the time, then at least you have something to fall back on in development that you can also know that like if you accidentally like leave it in there, it's just a dead dependency and it's not going to run. If somehow it's in your main bundle when you ship, it's still not going to run. It's going to check your environment variables. Cool, so I have a bit of a roadmap for it and I would love some feedback. Like I have not showed this to anybody yet. This is like the first time I'm showing anybody. But I love some feedback. Ultimately, right now it just throws errors randomly in your tree. What I want to do is introduce specific types of chaos, like network errors, simulate really slow network speed, simulate offline, simulate really like overclocking CPU, simulate weird language errors, layout errors, like all kinds of stuff. But this is just where I've landed in 2 weeks of work. So I'll do a quick demo, and then I'm going to shut up. You can check this out yourself if you want. But so we've got like these components, and we've got like, oh, you can't see that, can you? Wow. All right, sorry, big Phil. There we go. I think.
Like something injected
You're
chaos.
experiencing chaos?
I am experiencing chaos. Level 2. All right, I think I should have to disconnect to reconnect. Boom. All right, there's some chaos. So we've got 3 components here, and then we've got these pieces of text. These are actually individual components, but they're wrapped in, they were all wrapped with chaos. And we've got, I think, level 1, level 3, and level 5. So we're gonna just reload here and see what we can get. There we go, got some chaos. I'm handling the error gracefully. I'm not, obviously, it's like a stupid demo. But the point is, like, this is hopefully giving you an idea of what you can do. Like, you can wrap any piece of your tree, and basically wherever you put an error boundary, wrap it with chaos too. Like that's the idea. Is like you wrote an error boundary for this feature that you think makes sense. Also wrap that right inside the error boundary. Wrap it with chaos. The chaos will throw the error. Your error boundary will catch it. Keep reloading. Yeah, whatever. Cool. So sorry, I have to like stop casting, recasting. Okay. Come on. All right. Cool, so that's available for testing. That's the demo site. It's on my GitHub, and it's also an NPM. You can just NPM install React Chaos. And that's it. Thank you.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
You talked about whether the sibling should crash or not. In some cases, we actually said yes, sometimes no. How would you actually wrap the siblings and handle it in such a way that only the one sibling would crash, but the other 2 siblings wouldn't? Because you would have to wrap them all in the error boundary, right? Or how would you wrap them, I guess, in the error boundary
So
to make sure they didn't crash?
what I think I understand. So you have 3 siblings, and say 1, 2, 3. The middle one's the one that you want an error boundary around. So what happens, at least in terms of...
You wouldn't wrap them all, you would just wrap the one.
Yeah, in terms of your tree, the error boundary becomes a sibling to the other 2. Like in terms of like, if you're visualizing the JSX, it's like component 1, error boundary, component 3. So the component 2 becomes a child of the error boundary.
And the other question is considering the example that you gave with a credit card input or something, how would, since the one component is the only one that actually has, well, you said you'd make the whole thing fail. Well, is there any way to actually do automatic recovery, try to recover, or anything like that with this, or is it just simply, you're probably going to have to reload the page to get it to...
Well, it depends. Like, and that's actually where the value in thinking about, really thinking about, contextually thinking about your fallbacks. Because if you, say you just had a network request fail because they switched Wi-Fi's for a second when they were in the middle of fetching some data. Well, a network error occurred. You could, if it's like that little suggestions widget, you could say, failed to fetch the suggestions, click the retry. And then they could click it, and they don't have to refresh the whole page. They could just click to retry the fetch. Or you could even put in a timeout and like try again, and just like have a spinner that says trying to like if you've been on Slack and you're offline, or it goes offline, it's like attempting to reconnect every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Like it really just depends on your app. Like it's every situation is going to be different. But you can get some situations where you don't have to refresh the whole page.
Okay. Is there a way to actually do like generic like spinner, like retrying thing, and actually use that with other error boundaries that are more specific?
So, like, always use a spinner, but maybe like have other things.
Yeah.
Possibly. Like, there's a danger there where, like, obviously you can always, like, in your fallback component, just anytime you make a fallback component, import the spinner.
I got you.
If you wanted to make an abstraction, you could, but the danger in that is that you start making a generic abstraction and go down that path, and then you end up putting a spinner in a component that really didn't need a spinner.
Fair enough.
So it's like, you just have to find the right balance. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just kind of talking about fallback UI, what are some good practices for a designer to have as fallback UI? Just kind of like make it look like this, or are there just like some standard things that you might do for that? Because I know like a little bit, but not a lot. I don't have any formal UI training.
Yeah, well, me neither. I would say, just thinking critically about like if you've ever like heard of the like 8 states of design, you have like some data, no data, like a failure, like lots of data, you know, whatever. You always like pay some extra attention to the error piece, and like if this goes wrong, like you as a designer could even draw out those error boundaries. Like,
Yeah.
now that you kind of know about them, you could say where are these feature boundaries, and then this is where I want the error boundary, and then this is like what I want to happen. And a lot of times it's not going to be pure UI, it's also going to be some sort of interactivity, like maybe retrying a network request or something like that. Yeah, but I would say like just practice implementing like error boundaries on the next design, like the next screen you design.
Okay.
Sit down and draw like where are the feature boundaries and how should these siblings interact with each other. Or like let the developer like go through the component tree with you, and then you can kind of see how it's built, and then you can then go back and add
Just make suggestions. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So we'll take like a 3-minute break, and then we'll pick it back up.
Here with the HDMI and
I
see it. I think it's on the right side, probably, right?
Yeah, it's right here.
I'll try it out, see if it works.